or panel above your head.
Weather seems to be getting bad here.
Imagine yourself as a young teenager, just 17 years old, sitting on a plane, high in the sky, on a normal flight. The weather is stormy, but nothing too unusual. Suddenly, without warning, the aircraft starts shaking violently. You hear a loud crash. The plane is breaking apart. You feel the sensation of falling, and then everything goes black. When you wake up, the world around you is nothing like the one you knew. You're in the heart of the Amazon rainforest, lying amidst the wreckage of what used to be a plane. What would you do? How would you survive? This was the unimaginable experience of Juliane Koepcke, a German teenager whose survival story after a plane crash in the Amazon jungle defies belief. The flight and the crash. It was Christmas Eve, 1971. Juliane Koepcke, along with her mother, boarded the LANSA flight in Lima, Peru, heading to Pucallpa. The flight was supposed to be smooth and uneventful, just a short journey that would last little more than an hour. But the flight would turn into a nightmare neither Juliane nor anyone else on board could have anticipated. The plane was a Lockheed Electra, and it had just started cruising at 3,000 meters, 10,000 feet, when the unexpected storm hit. Lightning struck the aircraft, sparking a deadly explosion that tore the plane apart. In a few moments, the plane was reduced to pieces, falling through the sky towards the dense jungle below. Juliane was incredibly lucky. Despite the violent crash, she remained strapped to her seat. The wreckage scattered across the Amazon, but Juliane fell with the remains of the plane. She would later learn that most of the other passengers had perished, including her mother. But Juliane somehow miraculously survived. When she regained consciousness, she found herself lying in the jungle, surrounded by the wreckage of the airplane. She was injured with a broken collarbone, a gash on her arm, and bruises everywhere. But there was no time to waste. The jungle was unforgiving, and she needed to act fast to stay alive. The first steps towards survival. After the crash, Juliane was left completely alone in the wilderness. She couldn't see anyone else from the flight, and her mother was nowhere in sight. The only thing Juliane could do was to focus on surviving. Her first priority was to find water. As anyone who has survived in the wilderness knows, water is the most important thing for survival. She managed to find a small stream nearby and used the remnants of the plane to create a makeshift container. Using her limited resources, she collected water and drank sparingly. She knew that without enough water, she wouldn't last long. But surviving on water alone wasn't enough. The Amazon rainforest is vast, dense, and full of dangerous snakes, insects, and large predators like jaguars. Juliane knew she had to keep her wits about her. But despite the overwhelming fear she must have felt, she pressed on, determined to live, struggling with hunger and injury. The first few days after the crash were the most difficult. Juliane's body was aching from her injuries. Her arm was badly wounded and her collarbone was broken. She couldn't move easily, but the jungle was full of dangers and she had no choice but to keep walking. Juliane relied on her basic knowledge of biology and nature to help her. She knew how to identify some plants and fruits, so she foraged for whatever food she could find. She was hungry, but the food from the jungle wasn't enough to keep her strength up. The tropical heat and humidity were also draining, making it even harder to survive. In addition to hunger and thirst, her injuries started to worsen. The cuts on her body became infected. She had no medical supplies, no bandages to protect the wounds. Her swollen eye made it even more difficult to see, and every step she took felt like a battle. Despite all of this, Juliane never stopped. She refused to give up, even when everything seemed hopeless. The harsh realities of the jungle. The Amazon rainforest is one of the most dangerous places on Earth. It's dense, full of poisonous plants, venomous snakes, and creatures that can harm or even kill you. But it's also rich in resources, offering survival tools to anyone who can find them. Juliane knew this, and despite her pain and exhaustion, she focused on staying calm and avoiding unnecessary risks. Every day she pushed forward. She made her way through thick, tangled vegetation, using all of her energy just to move a few feet at a time. But the jungle was not going to make it easy. The mosquitoes were relentless, biting her day and night. Every now and then she would hear the sounds of large animals moving in the distance, reminding her that danger was never far away. Despite everything, Juliane kept moving. She was determined to find a way out. But after a few days, the jungle started to wear on her mentally as well as physically. She was alone, far from any help, and there was no telling how far she had wandered. It must have been incredibly isolating to be out there, without anyone to talk to, with nothing to hold on to except her own will to survive. The mental battle of survival. Surviving in the jungle wasn't just about physical endurance, it was about mental strength. Every day, Juliane faced moments of doubt and fear. Her mind must have raced with questions. Would she ever be found? Was anyone even looking for her? How long could she last out there? But Juliane was a fighter. She had been raised with strong values, and in that moment, those values became her greatest strength. She kept reminding herself that she had to keep going, step by step, no matter how hopeless it seemed. It's easy to imagine that after days of isolation and struggle, Juliane could have lost hope, but she didn't. Her knowledge of the jungle, though limited, helped her avoid some dangers. She used her instincts to stay safe from venomous snakes, dangerous predators, and diseases. But the jungle didn't stop being dangerous. Every step was a risk, and every night was filled with uncertainty. The Turning Point Rescue. On the 11th day, Juliane had reached the breaking point. Her body was weak and her mind was exhausted. She had been walking aimlessly through the jungle for days, without any clear direction. Just when she thought she could go no further, something extraordinary happened. Juliane came across a group of loggers who were working deep in the jungle. They were shocked to find a young girl, injured, dirty, and barely able to stand, stumbling toward them. They immediately offered her food, water, and medical help, and she was finally able to rest. These loggers, working in a remote part of the rainforest, had no idea how long Juliane had been stranded. But they quickly realized that she was a survivor. They helped her get to a nearby village, where she was flown to a hospital in Pucallpa. She had made it out of the jungle, and her story was just beginning. Aftermath, a miraculous story of survival. Juliane's survival story was broadcast around the world. It was an extraordinary tale of strength, courage, and perseverance against all odds. She had survived a plane crash, spent 11 days in the Amazon rainforest, and emerged alive when most would have assumed she was lost forever.
It was a terrible situation. The plane was jumping up and down. We have had very, very heavy turbulences. I saw a very, very bright light on the right outer engine of the aircraft. And in that moment, my mother said very calmly, "That's the end, now it's all over." And these were the last words I ever heard from her. The people screaming desperately, and it was pitch black around us. And the deep roaring of the plummeting engines, it was a noise that filled my head completely. And then from one moment to the other, all that finished. All that stopped, and I was outside. I was outside the aircraft. The plane broke into pieces at a height of about 2 miles, as I learned after my rescue. And I remember clearly that I felt completely alone in that moment. I was in a free fall and hanging head over heels, and I remember the whispering of the wind. That was the only noise. I was aware, and I saw the canopy of the jungle spinning around beneath me, and then I get unconscious. And too quickly, it was impossible to feel panic or fear in that moment. I only realized what was happening.
The explorer signing off.